The cold was not something Lyra had been prepared for. She came from a world of warmth, a planet called Velyra, where the sun never set and the air was thick with the scent of flowering vines. Her people were not built for cold. Their skin was thin, permeable, designed to absorb heat and moisture from the tropical atmosphere. They had no fur, no blubber, no natural insulation. They had only each other, pressing close in communal nests, sharing body warmth through the long, balmy nights. But the nights on Velyra were never cold. Not like this. Lyra had never known cold until the day the slavers came. They were Zorathi, a species from the frozen outer rim, and they had no interest in Velyran culture or art or history. They were interested in one thing: labor. Velyrans, with their delicate hands and keen eyesight, were perfect for the precision work in the Zorathi mining colonies, assembling delicate machinery, sorting precious crystals, working in conditions that would freeze a Zorathi solid but leave a Velyran alive long enough to be useful. Lyra had been taken from her nest at dawn. She remembered the screams of her sisters, the cold metal of the restraints, the dark hold of the transport ship. She remembered the long journey through space, huddled with dozens of other Velyrans, all of them pressing together for warmth that never quite came. And she remembered the moment they arrived on Zorath Prime. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The transport ship's ramp lowered, and the air that rushed in was so frigid it burned. Lyra gasped, her thin skin tightening, her breath crystallizing instantly. Around her, other Velyrans cried out, pressing closer, but there was no warmth to be found. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun a distant, feeble star, and the ground was covered in something white and soft that Lyra had never seen before. So, she learned the word later. She learned many words later. The Zorathi guards, massive creatures wrapped in thick furs, gestured with sharp sticks, herding the Velyrans toward a low, dark structure. Lyra stumbled, her bare feet sinking into the cold white substance, and she felt her toes go numb. Then her feet. Then her legs. By the time they reached the structure, she could no longer feel her body at all. The interior was marginally warmer, which is to say it was merely freezing rather than lethal. There were rows of narrow bunks, each with a thin blanket that smelled of mildew and despair. Lyra found a corner, curled into a ball, and tried to remember what warmth felt like. She thought of her nest, her sisters, the hot sun on her skin. The memories were already fading, replaced by the constant, gnawing cold. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and numbness. The Velyrans were woken before dawn, marched to the work sheds, and set to tasks that required steady hands and sharp eyes. Lyra's fingers, once nimble and quick, became stiff and clumsy. She made mistakes. She was punished. The punishments involved being left outside, in the cold, for hours at a time. She learned to hate the cold. She learned to fear it. She learned that cold was not just a sensation, it was a weapon, a tool, a cage. And then one day, everything changed. The human arrived on a supply ship. Lyra had heard of humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard of humans. They were the newcomers, the upstarts, the species that had exploded onto the interstellar scene with a combination of terrifying ambition and baffling kindness. They made alliances where others made war. They traded where others conquered. They were strange, unpredictable, and utterly incomprehensible. This human was no different. His name was Elias, and he was a cargo inspector for the Interstellar Commerce Union. His job was to check the shipments leaving Zorath Prime, crystals, machinery, and other goods bound for markets across the galaxy. He was tall for a human, with dark skin and close-cropped hair, and his eyes were the color of warm earth. He moved with a quiet confidence, observing everything, saying little. Lyra first saw him on his third day at the colony. She was in the work shed, her numb fingers struggling to place a tiny crystal into a circuit board, when she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway. He was wearing a heavy coat, thick boots, and gloves that looked impossibly warm. His breath misted in the frigid air, but he did not shiver. He simply watched. Their eyes met for a moment, and Lyra looked away quickly. She had learned long ago that attracting attention was dangerous. But something in that brief glance lingered, a flicker of something she could not name. That night, she was punished again. She had made another mistake, dropped another crystal, and the guard had dragged her outside. The door slammed behind her, and she was alone in the freezing dark. The wind howled across the compound, carrying tiny particles of ice that stung her exposed skin. She huddled against the wall, wrapping her thin arms around herself, and tried to remember warmth. She failed. The cold crept into her bones, her blood, her thoughts. She began to lose track of time, of place, of self. There was only the cold, endless, and absolute, and the knowledge that soon there would be nothing else. And then, a shadow moved in the darkness. Lyra tried to look up, but her body would not obey. She heard footsteps crunching in the snow, felt a presence beside her, and then, warmth. Arms wrapped around her. Strong arms, wrapped in thick fabric, pulling her close. She felt heat radiating from a body pressed against hers, felt a coat being draped over her shoulders, felt hands rubbing her arms, her back, trying to generate friction, trying to bring her back from the edge. "Stay with me," a voice said. "Come on, stay with me." It was the human, Elias. Lyra tried to speak, but her lips would not move. She felt herself being lifted, cradled against his chest, and then they were moving. The wind still howled, the cold still bit, but now there was warmth beneath it, a core of heat that refused to yield. Elias carried her to his quarters, a small, private room near the cargo bay, heated for human comfort. He laid her on his bed, piled blankets on top of her, and sat beside her, still holding her close, still sharing his warmth. For a long time, Lyra simply shook. Her body convulsed with spasms she could not control, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might shatter. But slowly, gradually, the warmth seeped into her. The shaking subsided. The numbness retreated. And for the first time in months, she felt her fingers again. She looked up at Elias, and he was looking down at her with those warm earth eyes. "You're going to be okay," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Lyra wanted to laugh. Safe? She was in the quarters of a stranger, on a frozen world, surrounded by enemies. She had never been less safe in her life. But as she lay there, wrapped in blankets and human warmth, she realized that safe was not the right word. The right word was something else. Something she had forgotten. Cared for. "You should not have done this," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They will punish you. They will." "Let them try," Elias said, and there was something in his voice she had never heard before. Steel. Defiance. "I've seen what they do here. I've seen the conditions, the punishments, the way you're treated. It's wrong. It's illegal under half a dozen interstellar treaties. And I'm done pretending I didn't see it." Lyra stared at him. "You would risk yourself? For me? For a stranger?" Elias looked at her, and for a moment, his hard expression softened. "On my world," he said, "we have a saying. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. I've done nothing for too long. Not anymore." In the days that followed, Elias became a regular presence in Lyra's life. He brought her extra blankets, smuggled her hot food, taught her words in his language and learned words in hers. He told her about Earth, a blue world, he said, with vast oceans and green continents and seasons that changed from warm to cold and back again. She told him about Velyra, the eternal sun, the flowering vines, the nests where families pressed together through the balmy nights. "You would like it there," she said one evening, huddled in his quarters while the wind screamed outside. "It is always warm." Elias smiled. "I might miss the cold. It reminds me that I'm alive." Lyra shuddered. "I will never understand your species." He laughed, and the sound was so warm, so human, that she found herself smiling too. But their secret could not last forever. The guard who had left Lyra outside that night had been reassigned, but he had not forgotten. He had seen the human carrying the Velyran, had reported it to his superiors, and had waited for the right moment to act. That moment came on a night no different from any other. Lyra was in Elias's quarters, wrapped in blankets, when the door burst open. 3 Zorathi guards filled the doorway, their massive forms blocking the exit, their dark eyes gleaming with triumph. Behind them stood the colony overseer, a scarred veteran named Vorsk. Well, Vorsk rumbled, his voice like grinding ice. "The human and the Velyran. How touching." Elias moved instantly, positioning himself between Lyra and the guards. "She was freezing to death. I was saving her life. That's not a crime." "On Zorath Prime," Vorsk said coldly, "fraternizing with labor stock is a crime. Interfering with colony discipline is a crime. Harboring a runaway is a crime." He stepped forward, his massive hand closing on Elias's shoulder. "You are all of those things." Elias did not flinch. "I'm a representative of the Interstellar Commerce Union. I have diplomatic immunity. Touch me again, and you'll have more than just me to deal with." Vorsk laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Your union is 1,000 light-years away. By the time they hear of your disappearance, you'll be just another frozen corpse in the ice fields." He gestured, and the guards moved forward. Elias fought. Lyra had never seen anyone fight like that, with such desperate, furious energy, but there were too many of them. They pinned him to the ground, and Vorsk stood over him, a blade of black ice gleaming in his hand. "Any last words, human?" Elias turned his head, looking past the guards, past the threat of death, to Lyra. His eyes, those warm earth eyes, met hers, and he smiled. "Stay warm," he said, and then everything happened at once. The door burst open again, but this time it was not guards. It was humans, a dozen of them, wearing the uniforms of the Interstellar Commerce Union Security Force. They moved with precision, with purpose, their weapons trained on the Zorathi guards. Behind them came more humans, and behind them, a woman in a formal diplomatic uniform, her face set in hard lines. "Vorsk," the woman said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I am Ambassador Chen of the Interstellar Commerce Union. You are in violation of 17 articles of the Galactic Labor Accord, 3 treaties on the treatment of sentient species, and 1 very specific clause about not trying to murder my people." She stepped forward, her gaze never leaving his. "Release my inspector. Now." Vorsk's blade wavered. For a long, terrible moment, Lyra thought he would use it anyway. But then he lowered his arm, and the guard stepped back. Elias struggled to his feet, clutching his side where a blow had landed. He looked at Ambassador Chen, then at Lyra, still huddled in the blankets. "The Velyrans," he said, his voice rough. "All of them. They're coming with us." Ambassador Chen looked at Lyra, at the thin skin, the delicate features, the desperate hope in her eyes. She nodded. "All of them," she agreed. The evacuation took 3 days. 3 days of organizing, of negotiating, of facing down Vorsk's barely contained fury. 3 days of loading Velyrans onto human ships, of wrapping them in blankets, of watching them step into warmth for the first time in months. Lyra helped where she could, translating, comforting, reassuring. But always her eyes sought out Elias. On the final day, as the last ship prepared to depart, they stood together at the edge of the compound. The wind still howled, the snow still fell, but Lyra barely noticed. Beside Elias, she had learned that cold was just a sensation. It could not touch her anymore. "What happens now?" she asked. Elias looked out at the frozen world, at the dark structure where she had suffered, at the guards who watched from a distance with impotent rage. "Now you go home. Or wherever you want to go. The Union has offered asylum to all of you. You can start over." Lyra was silent for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I do not know where home is anymore. Velyra is gone. The Zorathi destroyed our nests, scattered our people. I have no sisters left, no family, no place to return to." Elias turned to look at her, and in his warm earth eyes, she saw understanding. And something else. "Then come with me," he said. "Earth is warm. Not as warm as Velyra, but warm enough. And I know a place where you can start over. Where we both can." Lyra stared at him. "You would do that? Take me with you? After everything?" Elias smiled, that same warm, human smile that had first cracked her defenses. "On my world," he said, "we have another saying. Home is not a place. It's the people you love." He held out his hand. "Come home with me, Lyra." She looked at his hand, then at his face, then at the ship waiting behind them. The ship that would take her away from cold and fear and despair. The ship that would take her to warmth, to hope, to him. She took his hand. And as they walked together toward the ship, the snow falling around them, the wind howling its last protest, Lyra realized that she was not cold anymore. She had not been cold since the night a stranger had held her close and refused to let go. The ship lifted off, leaving Zorath Prime behind. Below them, the frozen world shrank to a point of light, then vanished entirely. Ahead lay Earth, blue and green and warm, waiting to welcome them. Lyra leaned against Elias, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body, the quiet strength of his presence. She thought of the night she had been left to die, of the shadow that had moved in the darkness, of the arms that had wrapped around her and refused to let the cold take her. She had been shivering in the cold, a stranger in a hostile world, with nothing but despair ahead of her. Then the human held her close. And she had never been cold again.